Hi, Booktube, and welcome to another fiction review. I'd like it to be known that much credit for today's content must go to another creator, and so this is my shout out to Debate Books. You will find a link to her channel in my description box. I was watching her go through the Booktube Newbie tag questions, and when she got to question number 5, what book or series got you into reading, she lifted up this book and held it in front of her camera. This was a book gifted to her by her mum, because her mum could see that her daughter was getting through books at a rate, right? And so she decided, what am I going to do? She thought the only solution was to get down to a bookstore, head straight to the young adult section, and just buy her something, anything with more pages, right? And then I had to smile because Deb was telling this story, and she gets to the part where she says about her mum, and I'm quoting her now, "Little did she know that I was about to become obsessed, like truly obsessed, with the series." Now, Deb feels that this book is not spoken about often enough, and if my limited BookTube experience is anything to go by, I agree with her. I've watched loads of newbie creators, and I've heard them talk about formative reading experiences with Harry Potter, Lemony Snicket, Hunger Games, Babysitter's Club, Twilight. But Deb was the first person who really passionately championed this book and the series that it started. Today, we're going to be reviewing Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman, and we'll go straight and see if I can pitch the novel. This is a story aimed at a young adult market which presents an alternative reality. In this world, there was a powerful African empire which went out to conquer other lands, and they colonized all of Europe. Initially, they enslaved all the white inhabitants who became known as Noughts. Now, Nought is a common English synonym for zero, for nothing. And this label signifies that white people, in the eyes of their black colonizers, don't count for anything. When the novel opens, we are aware that some change has happened. Slavery has ended, but the social order is still very divided. Black citizens who are known as crosses, they enjoy greater wealth, better education, career prospects, and a greater sense of personal safety than the white Noughts. Into this world, 2 people are born, a black girl named Persephone, or Sephi, and a white boy named Callum. As very small children, they play together because Callum's mother was also Sephi's nanny. In another reality, they would probably grow up to be good friends and maybe something more. How they're going to find their way in the world of Noughts and Crosses is another question altogether. So let's do the mundane details. How long? How did I get it? How much did I pay? That kind of thing. To spare my poor, overcrowded bookshelves, I bought the Kindle edition of Noughts and Crosses, which is 433 pages long. I should say the Kindle version on the Amazon UK site was on special offer. It was marked down from $7.99 to $3.99, and I believe that price is still on offer. The price for a new paperback copy on Amazon was £8.17, but because it is an older book, from 2001, there are plenty of secondhand copies online, and they go for various prices. And also, for the sake of transparency, I need to state that I purchased this book in this January, by the rules that I set myself for my own Read What You Own challenge. I am permitted to buy 4 books during the 12 months, just 4, okay? I decided that I would let myself purchase Noughts and Crosses as one of those 4 because A, 4 books per year equals 1 book per quarter. And by the end of January, I will be a quarter of the way through the challenge. B, January is my birthday month, and you can treat yourself on your birthday. Yeah, definitely. And C, I really, really wanted to read Noughts and Crosses. That's how persuasive Debate Books was. It really, really was. I didn't want to wait until November. Okay, what do we know about the author? Malorie Blackman was born in London in 1962. She was a voracious reader from an early age, right? Something that I think Debate Books can identify with. In an interview she gave for the BBC4 program, Ways to Change the World, she said that she had 2 libraries that were equal distance from her home. And any given Saturday, she would be spending all day at one of those 2 libraries. And I just thought it was fantastic. She would take a packed lunch, right, on those library days, go to the library, read as much as she could from opening till closing time, and then sign out as many books as she was permitted to, so that she would have enough material to read to get her through to the next Saturday. It's fantastic. Now, she didn't plan a literary career initially. She got her HNC qualification in computer science, and she took a job in programming. It didn't take her long to realize that she needed work that was going to challenge her creatively. It doesn't mean that the programming language didn't come in handy. I mean, her first novel, Hacker, follows a teenage girl who uses her computer knowledge to prove her father's innocence. In her BBC Maestro class about writing for children and young adults, Malorie Blackman lists the number of books she's written so far at 70. Noughts and Crosses was novel number 50. Blackman has also written television scripts for British programs, including Doctor Who. She's adapted 2 of her own books for the screen and for radio, and also written 2 stage plays. In 2008, she was awarded an OBE for her services to literature. And in 2013, she succeeded Julia Donaldson to become the UK Children's Laureate. And during her time in that role, she set up the United Kingdom's first young adult literature convention. Let's get into the meat of the book now. We'll talk about the setting. The setting for Noughts and Crosses is an alternative United Kingdom. However, there's no time frame nailed down, and there's no location that's specified in the novel. We don't know what city Callum or Seffi live in. There's no street names, no known landmarks, no corporate names, no historical events referenced. There is a single reference to the Queen, but we never meet this Queen. We don't know who she is. And Seffi's father is a member of Parliament. What we do understand from the descriptions of the Hadley household compared to the McGregor household is the socioeconomic chasm, between these 2 kids. And that's what sets up the situation that is going to make their friendship difficult to continue. You could say that the setting is that social difference, which lends Noughts and Crosses actually quite a broad appeal. It's not a story about any specific place or time. It's a story about forbidden love, how society's prejudices, how racism can distort and undermine communication, how any kind of prejudice, it perpetuates itself because the distrust that you cause by real injustice and oppression, the emotions that are generated from it, they get carried over into every other situation, innocent or not. And that completely works against the possibility of keeping a friendship and the trust that's needed going. And Blackman does something very interesting with the narrative voice. For viewers who live outside the United Kingdom, you may or may not know this, but Noughts and Crosses is the UK term for the game of tic-tac-toe, or some people call it X's and O's. It's a very smart metaphor. Malorie Blackman called it, I'm quoting her now, one of those games that nobody ever plays after childhood because nobody ever wins. And she succeeds in conveying that sense of pointlessness in the title, but also in the way she uses her narrative. What Blackman presents throughout most of the novel is a viewpoint that alternates, like players taking their turns in a game of Noughts and Crosses or tic-tac-toe. So you get a chapter narrated by Callum, followed by another narrated by Seffi, then back to Callum, then back to Seffi, etc. And it goes like that. The chapters are short, sometimes they're very short, so the story moves at a cracking pace. And Blackman ensures that her longer chapters always turn. And I'm talking about the Robert McKee thing now, if you don't know his book story. Every chapter turns, it leaves the characters in a different situation, or the chapter ends on a cliffhanger. You don't know what's going to happen next, and it's quite tense. The very, very short chapters, and I'm talking about these can be maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs long, those are the ones she often tends to use for character reflection or reaction. And this is very clever because it ensures that you develop deep emotional identification with both characters, but you're never diverted too long from the next thing that's going to happen. And I think for newer readers who are doing longer fiction, that kind of highly pacey, carefully timed back and forth narrative, it's very, very, very effective. Does the novel fit a genre label? Yeah, it is obviously a fantasy. We know I've said alternative reality, but think also of the tragic lovers Romeo and Juliet, except that in the case of Noughts and Crosses, we aren't talking about just 2 feuding families in one city called Verona. In Noughts and Crosses, we get the distinct impression that maybe the whole world is opposed to love between a white man and a black woman, or at least a whole nation. Think also of Othello. I really feel that Shakespeare would have recognized exactly what Malorie Blackman was doing when she took a promising friendship between an insider female and an outsider male, and then she just let the hatred of others around them gradually poison all that promise. Okay, next question. What, if anything, stands out as an aspect of this novel or its author? Well, if nobody minds, I really need to use this section to talk about how the novel affected me personally. This was one of the most frustrating things that happened to me while I read Noughts and Crosses. The novel clearly identifies Noughts as white-skinned and Crosses as brown-skinned. The reader isn't left to figure that out. It's not secret or subtle. No, it's very clear. And yet, I was never able, not 100%, to picture the characters with their correct skin color as I was reading. It drove me crazy. And no matter how much I stopped and lectured myself, no matter how often I made myself stop and reimagine a scene, reread and reimagine a scene and make sure that I pictured all the noughts as white and all the crosses as black, my brain would snap back to some kind of weird default that gave people with privilege, people who were rich, gave them white skin, right? Mrs. McGregor, Callum's mother, because she was a hired housekeeper and a nanny, I constantly miscolored her, and also Ryan McGregor saw them as black, had to keep correcting myself and saying they are not black in this book, they are white. To try and fix this, I decided I would watch an episode of the 2020 BBC television series based on the book, and that way I would at least have the actors' faces as resources that I could draw upon, and that did help. I stopped miscoloring the main characters, but minor characters or unnamed characters in the book, I still kept giving them the wrong color skin. I mention this because we've all heard someone defend themselves by saying, I'm not racist. And, I'm going to say this for what it's worth. What makes Malorie Blackman's book so important to me is the way it demonstrated just how ingrained my stereotypes of race are. The neural pathways in my brain have been set up, I don't know how many years ago, but the programming runs before I can stop it. And even though I got so angry with myself, and even though I repeatedly made myself correct my mental images, I didn't entirely eradicate the problem. So what I'm saying is that Noughts and Crosses taught me this lesson, that consciously disagreeing with racism, not wanting to be racist, it's not enough of itself to eliminate my own racism. Elimination, if that is even possible, it's going to demand perpetual, repeated checking for those mental reactions that are happening faster than my conscious, rational thought. And those reactions are just going to need repeated correction. Longtime viewers will know that I'm not a person who reads books that are in a series, but I'm going to make an exception for Noughts and Crosses. For a training exercise, if nothing else, I want to see what effect it will have if I read all 4 of the books that Malorie Blackman has written. Okay, next question. Is there problematic content in this book? Well, it is a book about racism. Malorie Blackman took some of her own experiences of racism and wrote them into Callum McGregor's story. The pace of the narrative means, yes, the reader moves quickly through those experiences, but I mention them in case they might be triggering. Now, what is the context and purpose of the problematic content? I'm going to quote from Malorie Blackman's interview that she gave for the BBC4 program Ways to Change the World in 2016, just after the 4th book of the series came out. Blackman was asked to comment on what inspired her to write Noughts and Crosses. And she said, and I'm quoting now, Noughts and Crosses, the first one was particularly inspired by the Stephen Lawrence case. I was watching a docudrama which showed just how the Lawrence family had been treated by the police, and I was so angry. And I've been criticized up until then for not writing about racism, as if a black author, that's the only thing they can write about. But I remember watching that and I thought, okay, now I'm going to write about racism. I felt ready to do it then. And a reminder that there's a link to that full interview down in my description box. Now, do I have any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? For anyone who watched my review way back of Jade L.B.'s novel, Keisha the Sket, they will remember that that book was published by the Murky Books imprint, which was launched by Penguin and the British rap artist Stormzy. Now, in 2022, Murky Books published Malorie Blackman's memoirs, called Just Saying, and that is my recommendation for this review. Okay? And that's another one done. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. Thank you again, Debate Books, for being the Noughts and Crosses champion. Absolutely. Really glad you brought the book to my attention. I'm going to go away now and work on another Middlemarch meditation, and I will see you again in a few days' time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.